So thank you very much for joining us tonight for our summer leadership series on budgeting dues and 990s, all the fun stuff a chapter treasurer needs to deal with. With the summer leadership series, it's always difficult to find the right time to do things. We don't want to do it in July or too early in August before students come back. We also don't want to wait until September because we know when you come back, you're incredibly busy. So our goal for these sessions are to take some time to go through them with those who show up and then record them, put them into our Asana chapter project so you as officers can watch them at your leisure. Heck, maybe you need to go back and watch it again. It's nice and easy to do. We are recording this, so absolutely feel free to ask questions, offer comments, clarification, but it will be recorded forever and put on our YouTube channel until we take it down and refresh it next year. But our goal tonight is just talk through some of the simple steps to keep in mind as a chapter treasurer. We might get a little bit more complex towards the end, but we're going to start simple. How to build a budget, how to deal with accounts receivable, and just some of that terminology you need to know and some things to keep in mind. All right. So to start building a budget, it's not as difficult as one may think, but it's something that you have to be intentional about. And every chapter is different. Some chapters have houses, and some of those chapters have to deal with rent for their tenants, whether they own the house or they rent a house. Some chapters have to deal with kitchen staff. Some have accountants. I'm going to review things specifically from a chapter side because as once housing gets more involved, number one, I really recommend working with a professional accounting firm. And in most cases, alumni associations are, if not leading this, helping closely with it. That said, it is absolutely the chapter's responsibility, and therefore you as chapter treasurer, to ensure that member dues and rent are being collected, even if you're using a third party. Someone in the chapter, a physical presence, needs to be mindful about what's going on and reporting if there are problems. And why is this? No one influences the membership and the incentives more than other undergraduates. Even our chapters that have great alumni associations that are really involved, they're going to go home at some point. They're not going to be in the chapter room for all the chapter meetings. They won't be able to see who's coming and going. They're not monitoring your parties to see who's coming and going. That's what you're doing. So where we are with our accounts receivable, with any outstanding invoices, it falls on the chapter. Also, one of the wonderful things about this experiment we call fraternity is learning self-governance. And I'm not saying mastering it. We hope by the time you're a senior, you're very confident in yourself, but it's a learning process. And let me tell you, doing this job as treasurer is one of the most important, one of the most meaningful, and will give you a lot of great experience. Not just the numbers, but talking with people, coming to resolutions, holding them accountable. That is one of the most, those kinds of soft skills in building them are so important in especially in your age group in college right now. But that's why it does fall on the chapter shoulders and yourself as chapter treasurer to accomplish a lot of that. We're here to help. We are here to support you. We will talk with you. We will even help you write letters and make phone calls, but ultimately, we need you to lead the effort. So let me start again with how to build a budget. There's an order to this. Just as I love the far side, first pants, then shoes. So what comes first? Income or expenses? you need to figure out your expenses first. Don't start building a budget by saying, we're going to charge $200 per person. We've got 20 people. That means we have $4,000 to work with each semester. You're going to be setting yourself up for failure. Maybe you'll end up with those numbers in the end, but you actually have to figure out to the best of your ability what you believe expenses are going to be. Best way to do this, look at last year. If you didn't have a budget before, hopefully you had a chapter checking account. You can look at all the expenses you had and line it up to the proper categories. If you can't do that, if you don't have that ability, go to your other officers and chairs and ask them to estimate what they feel they will need to accomplish their goals. And if they give you an answer right away, especially if they didn't know you were going to ask them that question, they haven't given it enough thought. Give them some time to think about what they want to do and what it'll cost. For instance, go to your recruitment chairman. About how many events will they have? How much will each of those events cost? Do they want to purchase Rush t-shirts and have it paid for out of dues? Do they plan to reimburse brothers for meals with potential members? That's a good idea. Have them walk through what they want and come up with that number. Same with philanthropy and service. Holding an event, it might not cost a lot of money, but it can cost a little bit of money, especially if transportation comes in, even if it's just getting a bunch of Ubers for brothers. It's a good idea to balance what brothers are expected to spend out of pocket for chapter events, as well as what's covered by the chapter. There's no perfect rule for what's what, but it is something to think about. So sit down with your officers and come up with a plan. It might not be perfect, but it's going to be a lot better to start there. Now, we've got some set expenses inside Upsilon to expect. Oh, and I should add, as a part of our Asana project, we've got some simple budgeting forms that some spreadsheets that you can use to help fill out with some pre-populated expense categories. Again, some of you may not need all these. Some of you absolutely will have to add additional ones. But we try to make the process as simple as possible. Our charges for next year, the member tax is $210 per member per year. So that's for returning members. The initiation fee is $255 per year. That's due once at the time of initiation. You do not have to pay the member tax and initiation fee in the same year. And when I say year, I mean academic year. So fall of 2024 and spring of 2025 is, for our purposes, 1 year. We have a flat fee per chapter called the chapter services fee, which is basically $1,950 split, $975 due in October 1st, $975 March 1st. That pays for the travel, hotel, and registration for the Archons Academy, as well as not the travel, but the hotel and registration for our Convention and Leadership Institute in the summer. The reason why this is a flat fee is because depending on whether you're a chapter of 10 people or a chapter of 100 people, it's the same cost per chapter. That actually came out of the convention. At one time, everything was structured per head, and some chapters noticed maybe there's a better way to do this. And the final piece is called the risk management assessment. I will have bills out very soon, by the first week of September. If you are a housed chapter, it is going to be a very similar amount to the member tax. But this is this pays for what's known as our general liability insurance that every chapter must have. And it's money in, money out. Whatever we're charged from our the company where we get our insurance, FRMT. What we're billed is cut up amongst the chapters based on where they reported themselves in July, and sent out per member. If you don't have a house, that is taken into consideration, and you do pay less. For those of you that are colonies, owl clubs, provisional chapters, there are brand new chapters like at Lambda, don't stress out. We work with you on a number of these fees, and some of them are due differently, and I will follow up with each of you specifically about that. But it's only at the beginning. Once we're back to full regular chapters, this is what the assessment schedule is. Copies of this are reviewed at the convention by the budget committee at convention, and we will be distributing them with every bill. And actually, these are the exact same amounts as last year. We did not increase anything over last year. So those are the international fees that you see at the top. The chapter expenses underneath, a lot of these are rather straightforward. I do need to point out, and I stress this as much as possible, chapter funds, what you are collecting as chapter treasurer, may not be used to purchase alcohol. That is a part of our risk management standards inside Upsilon. Now, you can rent out a venue with those fees, and allow brothers to pay per person, but you cannot purchase alcohol yourself. Even if you're hosting a party on your property, you have to have a BYOB event, or you can purchase licensed and insured bartenders to service your event and pay on a per drink basis. Many of our campuses require that, so that probably won't be a surprise to many of you. Another thing, and I know y'all aren't social chairs, so I won't get into it too much, but as chapter treasurers, I want to make sure you're in mind. So when we say social expenses, we're not saying alcohol, we're saying social events, because there's plenty of social events to have that don't involve alcohol. Or again, if you're renting out a restaurant, if you're paying for bartenders, that is absolutely appropriate to come out of your budget. One line that you might see here under chapter expenses that might not make a lot of sense to you is labeled bad debt. And what we mean by that is, well, think of it this way. How many of you actually collect 100% of your dues? And if you do, awesome, don't change. That's wonderful. But things come up. Brothers don't return to campus. Some brothers disappear during the semester and don't pay. Try to do your best to look at the percentage of bills that you had unreceivable in the prior year to create this category. You can call it bad debt, doubtful accounts, whatever, but you need to put in an expense there to mitigate this loss. If you have no idea where to start, I'd recommend starting at 10% of what you believe your income will be. And if it's less, awesome. Hopefully it is, quite frankly. You've got a surplus. That's always a great thing to have. And honestly, I would say if you are regularly over 5%, there's some things you definitely need to work on. But the reality is, if someone's not paying, that's just as damaging as having unwanted expenses. Once the money is emptied out of your checking account, you don't have money to do the stuff you want to do. So brothers who don't pay, that's just as bad as setting unreasonable expenses. And exactly how you want to code your expenses is up to you. So things might not be worded perfectly in the spreadsheet that we have. Feel free to change it. And again, think about adding categories. Again, you might not have IFC campus fees. Obviously, delete that expense category. You might not have well, hopefully you have chapter retreats, but maybe you're not holding a chapter retreat. You can remove that. So think about what you need in your expense categories. Another thing we put in there to remind people, the risk manager, or I'm sorry, the chapter service fee does not cover travel to convention. This summer, we're going to be in Syracuse, New York. So depending on where your chapter is and how far away from Syracuse you are, think about that to put in the expense categories. Whoever's going to convention, you should probably help them out, and the chapter should pick up those travel expenses. Uh, Now, what's not here uh, is philanthropic fundraising money. Uh, all of you will hold philanthropies probably at some point uh, in the fall and spring semester. I would recommend not putting this in your budget because that's kind of money in, money out. If you raise $1,000 for uh, um, the American Cancer Institute, you're going to then immediately donate that $1,000 to them. We don't need to add that into our budget. Now, you'll see we have philanthropy service expenses. A lot of times, especially our chapters that are in larger campuses, other organizations will hold philanthropies, and they'll say, if you want to have a team of Sayu brothers to, play in our um, uh, wiffle ball tournament, it costs $100 a team, and that's how they raise money for the philanthropy. That's what I mean by that expense category, because it is good to budget for that, to participate in those things. So creating a plan to do that is why we have that there. Or if you're setting up a service event, that you will often need supplies, budgeting for that. But the actual money you collect for the causes that you're raising money for, I'd leave that out of the budget. Uh, right. Now, income is actually a heck of a lot easier uh, because, as upsetting as it might be, our actual means of income is almost all through our members. And that's the term I'm using here, member dues. Some chapters will charge a fee as soon as pledging period starts. Some chapters wait until initiation. Uh, do charge something at initiation. We're charging you as a national organization. I can't recommend enough making sure you collect that up front. Don't wait. And again, this is why you need to calculate your expenses first. So now you know your expenses, your total number of brothers you're going to have in the fall. You divide that amount. That lets you know what you need to have to be your membership dues. You don't like that number, then adjust your expenses accordingly. Um, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have a pledge class, you're going to have initiations, charging them exactly what our initiation fee is. Feel free to charge a little bit more, but don't look at them as a giant revenue stream. I know chapters are doing that, but that would be a massive mistake. And there are ways to find other avenues of income, but I wouldn't overly plan on them unless there's something you become to rely on in prior years. Some chapters have found ways to fundraise for their chapter. It's usually not a very large amount, and the chapters who do it right connect it with optional expenses. And again, never budget more than the prior year. And what I mean by that is, okay, we're going to have a bake sale to raise money for recruitment T-shirts. If we don't have raise enough money for recruitment T-shirts, it's not the end of the world. That's where I see our chapters that work on fundraising the best. And I'm not talking about fundraising for a cause or philanthropy. Don't say, oh, we're raising money for the American Cancer Institute and then pocket the money. That's absolutely not all right. And even be very, very careful if you hold an event. Never, it is appropriate for the money you raise to cover the expenses for that specific event. That's completely appropriate, but not to pay brothers an hourly wage while they're working. Again, something I've not seen from SIU, but I want to make sure to state. That goes into when planning a philanthropy event, make sure your expenses aren't too high so you actually are raising money for a cause. Now, I've seen some groups find some creative ways to fundraise. Look at if anywhere in your region or around your college or university, if there are large events that happen at infrequent times, sometimes parking even for football games could be a good example. If you have a theme park nearby, a lot of these organizations, they're looking for people to help when there's a high traffic time, but it's not the kind of job where they can regularly get employees. A football game schedule, what there's 7, 8 home games. They can't find people who just want to work 7 or 8 times, but they definitely need people around. So they love working with student organizations to say, yep, we can get 20 people there. You often don't want to go to your home game, but if you have another college in the area, that could be a good example. Concert venues, that's another place where you see this a lot. I love going to the concert venue right here in Indianapolis, Deer Creek. It's almost always service organizations, churches that are working in the parking lot because they're looking for not hiring individuals, but if they can go to the organization and say, hey, can you promise to get 20 people to show up? We will pay for that. That's the kind of fundraising that tends to work. It won't exist anywhere. Everywhere. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. But do find those events. Sometimes if you go to your student activities office, they may know of some places where you can find that kind of revenue stream. Again, you won't see it everywhere, and it's really, really hard to locate. But I've seen some chapters be very successful with that. Another thing that I didn't put on here that you want to be careful about as an expected revenue stream are donations. And if you do try to collect donations, always work with your alumni. Don't just ask for donations without first talking with some alumni about your plans and where the money is going to go towards. I can tell you most alumni won't donate, especially meaningfully, to an undergraduate chapter directly. Not because even if you have great intentions, but they're worried that the money is just going to go to Friday and Saturday night and not to whatever it said, especially if you're trying to if you have a physical chapter house, and let's say you're trying to raise money to repair something, buy new furniture, work with your alumni association on that. Because the message from the alumni asking for donations will be much, much, much more successful. That said, inviting alumni back for an event, saying, hey, we would love to, throw this tailgate, help us pay for the tent and brats, that's perfectly appropriate. And many will. But don't overly plan for it because, especially in year one, it might not be as successful as it is in year 10. Final thing to keep in mind, can't charge admission to parties if you are serving alcohol. In almost every state in the United States, that's going to require a liquor license. And even if you're not in the United States and you're in Canada, that is against our risk management standards. You cannot charge admissions to parties if you are serving alcohol. And again, that'll probably be against your institution of higher education's rules as well. So I hope I'm not too bad news, but really when you're planning income, these are the buckets you have to plan for. There are some creative things I've also seen with fundraising that some groups have done around Parents Weekend. maybe, some campuses split it up and they have moms or dads day weekends doing things like silent auctions. But often those events, yeah, you'll raise a little bit of money, but it's often just enough to cover the weekend. And the reason why we do those things is to, well, have a fun event with the parents as much as anything else. The second, well, maybe even more important than budget. Well, both of them are equally important. All right. We don't have to rank everything. The second sheet you must have your accounts receivable. Um, Listing out every member and what they owe and any balances that are delinquent and how long they've been delinquent. It should be reviewed at every executive meeting and reviewed at chapter meetings. I firmly believe this information should not be kept private, especially if someone has not come to you for a payment plan and it's been approved. Uh, because just because someone wants a payment plan doesn't mean you have to give it to them. I mean, if you can't allow every brother to pay late because, well, the people who are asking you to pay for events, they won't be able to delay your due dates because you haven't collected dues from brothers. And many of you, the beginning of the fall can be the busiest time of the year, especially those of you that have recruitment right away. So be careful about payment plans. I'm not saying no, but just be mindful and make sure chapter brothers know that they're asking for a payment plan. It's not required. Um, uh, but you must have this sheet. If you cannot tell me who owes what and how much is past due in minutes, you are doing something wrong as treasurer. Um, put what is owed in writing, sign contracts, and I've got sample contracts I can send along. If people pay late, have a written agreement. And it's appropriate to charge more to people who are paying late. Or maybe you divvy it up and there's an incentive if you pay in full right away. Again, just make sure the budget keeps this in mind. But again, if everyone pays late, you're not going to be able to do the stuff you need to do. I'm not saying this to be a jerk or, to be the guy at nationals who complains about stuff, but it is the reality of the situation. Um, uh, and the other reason to get it in writing is hopefully this never happens, but if we have, if someone won't pay, and especially if they've used our services, we can then use that to work with the collection agency. Again, this is a last resort. We never, ever, ever want to go down this road. Uh, but in some cases, I've seen some chapters, especially those with houses, fall into debt and have to pay bills like property taxes that must be paid. Um, uh, Again, we never want to open up that door. It almost never, ever happens, but it helps so much to put things in writing to prevent that. And by the way, save these accounts receivable sheets. I just had a call with an alumni president last week, and they were so thankful they were able to get that from the chapter treasurer because it answered a lot of questions. And actually ended up things were much better than they had thought. Um, for us at the national organization, we will work with you. But it is your job to communicate with us. If you can't pay a bill on time, let us know in advance, not afterwards, but in advance. Um, and we will do our best to be able to build a payment plan that works for both parties. I can't promise it'll be everything. If a chapter comes to me and says, we can't pay everything now, we'll pay on, the last day of the semester, we all know how that'll play out. But our goal is to support you. That said, we'll come up with a payment plan that works for everyone. We do charge a 1% late fee per month. If you don't have an accepted payment plan or aren't following it. We have not been aggressive about this and have not charged many late fees. Uh, but we canceled them completely during COVID and the post-COVID years. But this next year, it will be a lot more form. And that's just because, just like you, we don't get the bills that we need on a timely basis. We can't do certain things. That risk management assessment I mentioned, our general liability insurance, our single largest line item, the entire budget. It's due October 1st. And it always makes me nervous because it's such a large line item early in the year. But anyways, we'll work with you. But again, I can't promise we'll accept the first draft of the payment plan, but we'll do our best. Keith Willard, our Director of Member Services, he's the guy who's happy to work with you on that plan. All right. And kind of going back to the budget, keep in mind you can balance your budget in two ways: increase expenses I'm sorry, increase income or decrease expenses. Don't just yada yada. Don't put in lines in your budget that aren't realistic. Don't put to be determined on something. Again, for some of you, maybe you're starting from scratch. Make an educated guess. Really sit down and think, and not just yourself. Gather your officers, think about what you need to do. I would rather try and be imperfect than just kind of uh, put some scratch together that looks good on paper and balances, but we know it isn't realistic. Um, Again, when setting dues, it's appropriate to budget in incentives to encourage early payment. You'll hear a term a lot: cash is king. And it's true. We'd much rather have the money in our bank account. But you have to account for any of those incentives. If you're going to say, let's say your budget comes up where dues are $500 a semester, but you give everyone 10% off if they pay by September 1st. Well, if everyone pays on September 1st, your income just went down by 10%. You didn't plan for that. You could be putting yourself in trouble. Um, Again, think about cash flow and due dates. Uh, for many of you, you need cash at the beginning of the semester. Like I said, our risk management assessment, that's October 1st. That's due. That's the one thing I can't put in a payment plan because I have to pay it on October 1st. Um, uh, Many of you have fall recruitment. That's going to cost money. So you have to make sure you are collecting money as much as possible right away. Those risk management assessments, those should be released next week. Um, and also share your budget and review it with the entire chapter at least once a semester. If you need to alter it, do it publicly and show it to everyone. Transparency is key to this. Brothers will understand so much better why they have to pay their dues if they understand where it's going. Um, if someone really, says dues have to be lowered, then point out to them, okay, that means we can't have formal. Is that all right with you? And you might see things change. For us in SIU, that's why at our convention, we've published not only our budget for the next year, but our performance over the last 5 years. It's reviewed by the budget committee uh, at convention, and it's actually approved by the entire convention. We put a lot of work into it, but again, and if any of you ever want a copy of it, reach out to me. I'm happy to pass it along. Whoever was at convention should have a copy of it in their materials, but I understand if they lost it. But we want to be transparent with where your dues are going. You'll see we're not our foundation does a great job of raising money, but they can't just spend it on anything they want. It only goes to educational purposes. Um, so we're not sitting on a ton of cash in Psi Upsilon. The reason why we're asking for dues is because, well, we need to pay to keep our organization moving. Uh, Now, there's different ways to go about collecting your money. I highly recognize, or I highly recommend using a third party. Uh, in my opinion, Legacy Financial and Omega Fi are two of the best. They're actually owned by the same parent company, and when you set up an account with them or actually look into them, they'll kind of let you know what's better for you, Legacy Financial or Mega Financial. And I'm being overly simplistic here, but if you're collecting $500 or less per member, usually Legacy Financial is a better option. If you're collecting rent, kitchens, meal plans, it starts to get more expensive. Omega Fi tends to be better. It's a lot more of a robust system. Actually, both of them have budgeting tools to help you out. There's another company out there called Greek Bill that's very similar, that's also good. Bill Highway. There's some new people in the market that I've been hearing a lot about, Crowded and Switch. Um, and a number of these companies, and Crowded and Switch in particular, they kind of act as your bank as well. They will create a bank account. They can get you debit cards. Debit cards you only put a certain amount on. So, okay, your philanthropy chair, your budget's $100. Here's your debit card that only goes up to $100. Um, uh, I'm not saying these are good options to look at to see if they fit for you. Legacy Financial, I think Omega Financial, they'll do that too. They'll be your bank. But let me tell you, no matter what you're using, it's going to cost you money. Nothing's free. And what actually makes me nervous is when some of these services say, hey, we're free. I can promise you they're not. They might not be charging you a monthly fee or a per member fee, but all of a sudden you start looking at the transactions, you might be charged 3%, 5% here. Um, uh, any of these services, if they allow payments by credit cards, I highly recommend turning that off, because as soon as someone pays by a credit card, like, you walk into a store, you pay $100 on your credit card, that store does not get $100. They're probably getting, especially they do high volume, so they're going to get a much better rate than you. They're getting 99 or 98. You're probably losing 3 to 5% every single time someone uses a credit card. I'm not saying no, but just keep that in mind. And again, something to keep in mind, budgets, especially if you collect large sums of money like rent, where people might be saying, yeah, $1,000, I'll throw it on my credit card. You might only be seeing 950 of that $1,000. And if you needed that, that could be a problem. Um, I'm not saying don't use, but beware some of those services like Venmo, Zelle. There's more and more popping up. They're good to complement what you're doing, but they don't replace other collection systems. Again, there's fees there. And you might not know exactly where they are. Um, Also, make sure they're set up as a business account with your chapter name, not a personal account. And don't open up a personal bank account either. First of all, that money is going to that person, and we all trust one another, but that can be very dangerous. Someone's personal Venmo account, they might use their Venmo account for personal reasons. Now you're mixing chapter funds and personal funds. That's dangerous. That's going to end badly. And not even someone intentionally spending it wrong, but just losing track of how much money is theirs and how much money is chapters. That can be a problem. Also, keep in mind, they may be responsible for taxes on that. Even if it was supposed to be sent on a chapter, you're personally paying them, and all these services have different amounts. And I even think it changes by state, but someone collects over $20,000 via Venmo, I believe that gets reported to the IRS, and the IRS is going to ask, why didn't you pay income tax on that? You might be able to get out of it, but you're probably going to have to hire an attorney to help you out through that. So just don't mix things. Use a business account. Um, The one thing you might be able to do is look at towards some of those personal budget apps to help build a budget. Some of those are free. I used to love something called Mint. It went away, and I don't know all the differences, but those are things that can help you out. But again, some of them are tied to these payment collection services. Be wary of using actually that if it's in someone's personal name. Because there's also a problem. What if the treasurer was a senior, they graduate, they move across the country, and now you're going to have a problem changing names on the bank account? Especially again, if it was a personal bank account and not a business account. Right. Some final tips when building that budget. Uh, don't rely again on a large pledge class to cover the costs and say, oh, we're going to knock it out of the park. We're going to recruit 30 people this year, despite us never recruiting more than 10 people in a prior semester. But that's how we're going to balance out our budget. You can't control the size of a pledge class as treasurer. So don't set yourself up for failure there. Again, create an allowance for bad debt, doubtful accounts. Don't rely on everyone paying in full. Do your best to estimate that. It's wonderful if you can go back to prior years with an AR sheet and use that number. Don't rely on donations or fundraising. If you did it last year, don't budget more, budget the same, have a surplus go towards optional stuff, or make sure the money you're raising in those categories can go to something on the expense side of things that if you don't raise the money, it's okay if it's not there. Or that expense is an optional expense. Um, it is absolutely appropriate to help brothers out with payment plans. And some chapters do have the ability to financially help some brothers who can't pay in full, but it has to be budgeted for. There has to be a system in place. It can't be, well, if you don't have a good system in place, you're going to be accused as treasurer of helping out people you like and not helping out people who you don't like. And sometimes, especially we're talking with financial assistance, approach your alumni association and see if they can help and help you with that system. Now, our foundation does have some ways to help you as chapters cover some things. But like I said, the foundation can't spend money on anything. It has to be for educational purposes. They have two great programs, though. One, we have scholarships to help brothers. And if you're an initiated member of Psi Upsilon, you are eligible for a scholarship. Applications go live in November and are decided in March, I believe, for a year, for that next year. There are also scholarships available for graduate students, similar time, actually same time frame. So scholarship applications go live in November. They're due in February. Announcements are made March, April for the next year. Don't rely on them, but our foundation does want to help you. So it's a great program. The second thing that might help you in a more immediate year is they have something called the Connect Stipend. If you're holding an educational event on campus, whether it's open to the entire campus or just open to brothers in the chapter, they will grant and they will let you know if the program is acceptable or not, up to $1,000 to a chapter. And it could even be inviting a successful alum back to campus, pay for airfare, pay for hotel room, maybe pay for a dinner around it. They will help you with some of those costs because that counts. That's an educational event. That person speaks about their career, what they're doing. And again, it doesn't have to be open to everyone on the campus. It can be just for the chapter. But yeah, we've seen chapters use it for career days. And not only for alums from their own chapter, we saw one chapter use it to invite an alumnus they saw on our speaker series event to speak to their campus. And I thought that was a great program. But our director of engagement, Jonathan Chaffin, myself, we love to work with any of you that are planning something like that. It's a great opportunity. Again, our foundation's goal is to help you, but they can't spend money on whatever they want. It has to be for educational purposes. When collecting reimbursements from chairs or officers, because there are going to be times, number one, make sure it's pre-approved, and two, require a receipt. I mentioned those expense debit cards. They always make me nervous because make sure the amount on them is low. If someone, let's say, for some reason, the philanthropy chair has a large budget of $1,000, I would not recommend putting that entire amount on that card right away. I would divvy it out slowly because, again, you want to make sure these expenses are pre-approved and you have a receipt so you're certain the money went to the right place. Now, encouraging members to pay their dues. This, as chapter treasurer, this is dealing with this is going to build the most character in you, but give you such great soft skills later in life because there's no perfect answer for this. And it's all a balancing act. Punishments or incentives, carrots or sticks. No chapter, it's very difficult to do this perfectly. And honestly, the best thing is culture. Once you get the expectation clearly across that brothers pay in full and pay on time, it becomes much, much easier. People emulate what they see, not what they're told, but what they see one another do. So as soon as there's a problem, as soon as someone's not paying, don't ignore it. Take action. If they don't have a payment plan, it is appropriate to review the accounts receivable in front of the entire chapter. If they truly have a problem, they should be coming to you beforehand. Um, have late payments, have the stick for people who have unexcused late payments. And I'm not saying that's going to work. Fines don't often work, but they're necessary as a reminder. Don't plan to make money off of fines. That's also going to set yourself up for failure. And they alone won't fix the problem, but oftentimes they will serve as that reminder that people need to pay. Honestly, you got to take away what they care most about. If you're not paying for the fraternity events, you shouldn't be allowed to come to the fraternity events. And again, this is for someone who's not working with you, not following a payment plan, not communicating with you. But why would you let them at that social event? Why would you let them come to formal? Why would you put them on the composite? Those things cost money that they're not paying for. That's not fair to all the brothers who are paying. And again, being transparent takes away a lot of their concerns. Show the budget, show where the dues are going, have agreements in place. Um, don't hide what our dues are from members that are joining. Be transparent about that. I wouldn't lead off a recruitment event saying, oh, by the way, here's exactly what we charge, but don't hide it either. Make sure you have those discussions so people know what they're getting into isn't free. And again, that initiation fee, I would require it to be paid before initiation. Don't wait until after. Um, let members know what the dues are as early as possible at the end of the previous term. Like if you're, and this is why we recommend treasurers are elected in December to start serving in January for a 1 year term. Because if that treasurer is around at the end of the spring term, winter term, depending on where your campus is, they can set the budget for the next year. And before people leave on summer vacation, we can say, here's what we believe dues will be for the next year, or at least give some good brackets because most of us have the most cash in our pockets at the beginning of the fall semester after we're done with our internships. Some other things to keep in mind. or some things I like to define. We always say chapter society of some, but the alumni association and the undergraduate chapter are two distinctive bodies. They're both nonprofits. They're both what are known as 501c7 nonprofits. Uh, but that doesn't mean donations to them are tax exempt. So if I'm donating to a chapter, I don't get any tax benefit from that. You as a chapter, if you're a 501c7 in good standing, you're not liable to pay taxes on your membership dues or any donations to you. It's just one of those things to understand. Sometimes people confuse that. They think uh, you always hear about fundraising and donors, for instance, giving to our foundation in large amounts because they want a tax deduction. That's a different kind of nonprofit. And there's no way for an undergraduate chapter, or even for that matter, alumni association, to become that kind of a nonprofit. Another term that many of you learn or you will learn later is called an EIN, an employment identification number, also called a tax ID number. Uh, Not all chapters need to have these, but if you have a private bank account as a chapter, I can assure you you have one. Think of it as a social security number for a business. Um, it's how the government keeps track of it, and you need that number to file your taxes every year because yes, you need to file taxes every year as a business because you are a business. Now, it's usually incredibly easy because most of our chapters collect less than $25,000 per year. And that's what's known in the tax filing you have to do. It's called an easy postcard, a 990N. It's completely done online. And even then, uh, if it's, I believe, $25,000 to $50,000, there's something called the 990 Easy. Yes, they call the 990N the easy postcard, and the 990 Easy is something different. Don't ask me why. Uh, that is also very easily fileable. You don't need to put in your income and expense statements to file either of those. If you collect more than $50,000, you have to file something known as a 990. That is something that you almost certainly need an accountant's help with or your alumni association's help with. Again, that usually only comes up with those of you that are dealing with rent and a house. So in many cases, you're already working with an accountant. Um, uh, some of you, your university works with you and you're actually using their EIN. A lot of times, if you're using the university bursar banking account, that's what's going on. But it's important to keep track of what your tax ID number is. Uh, we have many of those on file, and we use a company called file990.org. And what it will do is send a reminder to who we have on file as well, we use the chapter president and the chapter treasurer that's reported to us. We list them along with the EIN to file990.org. They will send you emails reminding you to file your taxes. But if we don't get the right reports in, or if we've never gotten your tax ID number, we can't do that. But this is something that, again, if you have a private bank account opened in the chapter's name, which is the right way to do it, you've got a tax ID number. And yeah, you have to file those 990. It might not seem like a big idea because the IRS really, they don't send much out until you don't pay for 3 years. And then the fines can get substantial. And technically, then you are now a for-profit company and you should be paying taxes on things like member dues, donations, etc. So that's the end of this presentation. That's a lot. I know it. And I am happy to talk with any of you whenever you like. If any questions come up, you also have your chapter coach, and they can be a great resource to help you through any of this. Again, in the Asana project, we do have some sample sheets for sample budgets, sample accounts receivable sheets. I believe there's even some sample membership agreements. If they're not there, we're happy to get them to you, but absolutely feel free to ask us any questions at any time. So with that said, I'll open it up to any questions